Happy holidays and welcome to the first video of I'll be reviewing for Christmas. I decided not to do a big introductory video this time. It's the holidays. I'm reviewing holiday related material. This isn't the plot to Lost. You don't need a flow chart to figure this out. And for this inaugural video, I decided I wanted to take a look at the most overdone Christmas story of them all. Of course, I am speaking of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. This thing has been reworked, reimagined, redone so many damn times. In a rare instance of forethought on my part, I did a little research, a quick web search, and according to one website, this story has been done no less than 107 different times. That's 22 stage versions, 2 operas, which I was even aware of, 4 recordings, 10 radio dramas, 49 various television incarnations, and 20 different movies for a grand total of 107 different versions. And quite frankly, I think that number sounds low. I think there are more that somehow didn't get counted. If you were a kid growing up in the 80s and 90s, every fucking TV show did a version of this for their Christmas special. The Golden Girls did it once. Family Matters did it. I'm pretty sure, I think Full House did some kind of version of it. I could be wrong on that one. But everybody, you were either copying this or It's a Wonderful Life. And with that many retellings, and each one of them coming at you like they're the first one to ever do it for you, it's easy to get very, very tired of it, to suffer from Christmas fatigue. And sometimes it takes a special production to remind you why this story is so good in the first place. Why is it being redone and retold so many different times? So with that in mind, I decided to gather up my favorite versions of this story throughout film, television, just little shorts, whatever, and present them for you, the viewer. You're welcome. So join me as I take you through my top 6 versions of A Christmas Carol. Why only top 6, you might ask? Because honestly, folks, if I had to review 4 more of these things to round it out to an even 10, I'd probably bash my head in. Number 6, The Flintstones Christmas Carol. All told, this one is pretty standard, which is why it's kind of at the bottom of this list. There's not a lot really going on here, except for one really big thing. The story is pretty standard, if you can ignore all of the egregious anachronisms, which it's killing me not to get into, but I'm trying to be positive with these reviews. So Fred gets the lead in the Bedrock Community Theater production of A Christmas Carol. He gets a big ego. He starts acting like a dick. Starts acting like Fred, essentially. And through the production, he learns to be a nice guy again. So pretty boilerplate. The animation is good. The telling of the story itself is decent. But when you get right down to it, there's not a lot that separates this from every other retelling of A Christmas Carol that has been done. So why then do I include this on this very, very short list of the ones I believe to be the best of all time? Well, because it includes one thing that up until that time, I had never seen included. Now, to explain this, we're going to have to take a quick little detour. With these stories, they tend to be condensed for either time or simply for simplicity's sake. But they all tend to hit the same beats, particularly when it comes to the Ghost of Christmas Past. So with the Ghost of Christmas Past, Scrooge goes back. He sees he was a lonely child at boarding school. He sees that he worked at Fezziwig's. whatever it was Fezziwig did. He worked there. Fezziwig's a nice guy. Scrooge could have been a nice guy. He met Belle. He becomes obsessed with money. He loses Belle. That's pretty much the main points that every telling of this story seemed to hit when it relates to Christmas Past. So much so that you kind of begin to wonder, why the hell are we going back and seeing Christmas Past anyway? It's just to give them a guilt trip? Obviously, it's for the audience to gain some kind of perspective on it, but what perspective are they gaining with that kind of best of reel? They're just gaining that he was sad as a kid. He could have been nice, but he chose to be a dick. That's basically what the audience is gaining. Until you find out that there's actually more material for Christmas Past that is very rarely included. As it turns out, and I did not know this until I watched the Flintstones version, the reason Scrooge was at that boarding school was because his father sent him there because his mother had died in childbirth with him, and seeing Ebenezer was so painful for the father that he sent him away. So Scrooge was basically the Tyrion Lannister of his time. However, unlike Tyrion Lannister, Scrooge had a sister that loved him and came for him and brought him back and gave him a glimpse of happiness until she died. Why are these details constantly left out of these tellings? Again, I think for one, it's due to time. There's a lot of story to kind of condense into a very, very short period. A lot of these things are only a half an hour, maybe 15 minutes long, so you can't hit everything, so I get that. But I think there's another reason, and this one I can't forgive, and I think it's trying to make the story too simplistic. It is much easier to ask your audience to simply accept the fact that he's just a mean old man and he just doesn't like Christmas, and if he learned to like Christmas, everything will be great, blah, 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 blah. As opposed to asking your audience to take a in-depth look at the psychological makeup of this person and what caused his anger, what caused his misery. The fact that every person, whoever was supposed to love him, either pushed him away or left. The reason that he covets money so much is not just because he's a greedy bastard, but because it's something he can control and keep control of, as opposed to the randomness of life that stole his mother, father, and sister from him. Plus, it's a way of guaranteeing that any interaction he has is done on his terms, as opposed to the terms of other people. But that's all too complex. We're asking the audience to sympathize with our villain, and why would we want to do that? Here in Tennessee, there's one of the theaters does a production of The Christmas Carol every year. Same production every year. I've worked on it a few times, and I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who was in it, and they said, "What do you think?" And I said, "It's good. It's a lot of spectacle. It's fun for the kids. But, I wish they would go more into the character of Scrooge." And their response was, "Well, Scrooge doesn't really have a character." And my jaw dropped. I thought that was one of the most crazy things I'd ever heard. Scrooge has an intense character. But because they cut some of those vital parts out of these productions, or they pay it lip service, look, there's his sister, she's gone, we don't get that impact, and we don't get to understand Scrooge in a way that maybe we could, and maybe make us understand the story deeper than just, you need to like Christmas. So that's a long rant. What does it have to do with anything? Because the very first time I learned about any of this was in the Flintstones Christmas Carol. The Flintstones got this right, which again is ridiculous when you consider they wouldn't have had a Christmas Carol and they wouldn't have celebrated Christmas. I know the George C. Scott version did it, but from a young person's perspective, this was mind-blowing information. And because of that information, because they actually took the time to include that information, that is why I put the Flintstones Christmas Carol on this list. I owe it that debt of gratitude. Number 5. Mickey's Christmas Carol. They say you never forget your first James Bond, and you never forget your first Doctor Who, and you never forget your first version of A Christmas Carol. And for me, Mickey's Christmas Carol was my introduction to the story. I remember it was released sometime in the early 80s. I don't have the exact date handy. I'm sure people online will find it. And it was released as a short before a re-release of one of their movies to theaters. I remember seeing it with my parents, and it has stuck with me. Possibly because the classic Disney cartoons and their Christmas episodes were a big part of the holidays for me as a kid. So I think by association, it's stuck in there. But aside from that, you've got, again, a very condensed version of the story, but I think they were smart in how they condensed it. You had, of course, gorgeous classic era Disney animation, which they're the best. You have the excellent casting. Of course, Scrooge McDuck as Ebenezer Scrooge is a no-brainer. You know, Donald as his nephew again. But you get the fun stuff like Goofy as Jacob Marley, or Jiminy Cricket as the Ghost of Christmas Past. The giant from Jack and the Beanstalk as the Ghost of Christmas Present. You know, this fun stuff of what was, you know, before the Marvel had their cinematic universe, Disney kind of had theirs. You know, their characters would interact and do these things, and that was always a thrill to see. And the final beat with Pete as the Ghost of Christmas Future is still really, really creepy in that great classic Disney fashion. So again, not the most, you know, complete version of the story, but one that holds a special nostalgic place for me. I just love it. Number 4, Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol. So we're taking a little bit of a downgrade in animation, obviously going from big screen, full studio Disney animation to very cheap made-for-TV animation. But Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol, for a long time, I thought was one of the best versions of this. First of all, you have Jim Backus doing the voice of the, you know, optically challenged Mr. Magoo, and Jim Backus as Mr. Magoo is just one of the most endearing, lovable characters in all of animation. I just, hearing his voice, and, oh, yes, very good, oh, Magoo, you've done, you know, it's fantastic. Once again, kind of like with the Flintstones version, we see that this one uses it being performed as a play as kind of the framing device, and I think that's a smart way to do it because it explains why Mr. Magoo is Ebenezer Scrooge as opposed to just he is. Interesting about this one is this one actually swaps the order. And I don't know, I've heard that, I think another one did. I think the George C. Scott version might have done this, where he's visited by the Ghost of Christmas Present first, and then the Ghost of Christmas Past. And that may be the way it's done in the book, but honestly, you're so used to going past, present, future, it's a logical organizational pattern that when they do Christmas Present first, it's a little jarring. Again, the animation is cheap, but there's a lot of heart in this one. A lot of that due to, again, the performance of Jim Backus, and a lot of it due to just kind of the animation has a charm. It's simplistic, but there's something really endearing about it. This one also has some really great songs. Of course, as part of those 20-some stage versions, a lot of those are musicals. This one has some great songs to it that stick in your head. The, you know, jingle, jingle, coins when they ringle. You know, the one that the villains sing after they're hawking all this stuff after he dies. You know, we're despicable. And they do that. La, 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 la. Love it. But best of, and probably the reason this earns such a high spot on the list, is going back again to my enjoyment of background information and character motivation. This one has probably the best song from Young Scrooge, the beautifully heartbreaking Alone in the World, where he sings about being alone and how, you know, just how heartbroken he is. And there is a beautiful point in this when old Scrooge, viewing it, does a duet with young Scrooge, and it's It's fantastic. It's a beautiful song, and it's one of my it's a favorite of the holidays. I know that sounds depressing, but I just love that song so much. And if they ever did kind of the master version of a musical of A Christmas Carol, I feel that song has to be in it, along with the songs from our number 3 production. Number 3, The Muppets Christmas Carol. Come on, it's me. You knew the Muppets were going to end up on this list, and really, I don't really know what to say about this one. It has become a standard of the holiday season for so many people. I remember when I saw that, I was in junior high when this came out, and I remember seeing an advert for it, and even then, as much as I loved the Muppets, I was very burnt out on the Christmas Carol as a story. So when I saw they were going to do it, I was like, oh, really? And of course I went to see it because it was the damn Muppets. And what I got was, again, something that was just virtually perfect. It just feels like with this version, they went through it and said, what is the absolute smartest choice we could make here? And then said, let's do that. You know, things like Gonzo playing Charles Dickens so they can include the actual narration bits. Gonzo and Rizzo doing their little Abbott and Costello act throughout the show. The kind of going, again, taking the hit from Mickey's Christmas Carol, the brilliant decisions of where to cast certain characters. You know, Kermit as Bob Cratchit and Miss Piggy as Mrs. Cratchit. And I think special applause has to go to Michael Caine in his turn as Scrooge, because this had to have been a very difficult thing, because you have to be both the emotional thrust and heart of the story, but you also have to be the constant straight man for the Muppets' particular brand of zaniness. And that is a lot to ask of anybody. But Michael Caine, being fucking Michael Caine, is brilliant. And what I love about his performance is he can pull off not only the emotional scenes, but the great comedic scenes so easily. I don't care how old I am. I don't care how many times I've seen this movie. When he says, remember it, this is Fozziwig's old rubber chicken factory, and did it with such a damn straight face, I laughed my ass off every single time. Sorry about the sun. For a holiday review, it's very, very sunny out. But don't worry, global warming's not a thing. Also, I think, as kind of teased in the previous video, or the previous entry, this one has the best fucking songs. These are just this is the Christmas Carol to me. These songs, I love every song from this film. I love Scrooge, his introduction song, One More Sleep Till Christmas, Marley and Marley, It Feels Like Christmas, Bless Us All, Thankful Heart. These are just great songs. I even love the much maligned and often deleted, save for a few VHS and DVD releases, When Love Is Gone. I think the music in this is perfect. The last thing to kind of say about this one is, I think a lot of people don't realize how much of an achievement this film really was, because a few years prior to this, that is when we lost Jim Henson. And then shortly thereafter, they also lost Richard Hunt, who was one of their primary performers, performing characters like Scooter. And there was this kind of question of, how do the Muppets continue on without their leader, without the guy who kind of, his creative vision drove them? And even the question of, should they even go on? And Brian Henson rolled up his sleeves and was dead set on proving the Muppets still had a place, and they were still important, and they still had something to offer. And damn did he deliver. Damn did they all deliver. So I don't think a lot of people realize that little bit of history, but Muppets Christmas Carol was an important feat, and that it's a reason why it's a holiday classic. Now, again, I think most people who know me are probably a little confused right now that this one isn't at the top. Well, it is and it isn't. It isn't in that it's number 3 in a top, 6 countdown. But it's number 1 in that of the traditional telling of this story. And the ones that kind of hit the same beats, it's by far my favorite. My top 2 are ones that decided to take this concept and do something a little different with it. How different? Well, let's answer that question when we take a look at number 2, Doctor Who's The Christmas Carol. So yeah, love this. Much like the Muppets before them, when I saw they were going to do this, there was the audible groan of, oh God, really? And then I watched it and immediately fell in love with it, and it immediately skyrocketed to the top of these lists. Around this time, we had a new doctor in Matt Smith, who came on, had a great first season, and was about to come up on his first Christmas special. The Christmas specials for Doctor Who around this time were greatly anticipated. They were big, big deals. And so he had some pretty big shoes to fill. And deciding to take a Doctor Who look at the story of A Christmas Carol was a bold choice. People can badmouth Stephen Moffat, who was the showrunner and writer at this time, but I say fuck that, because I think he did some great work and told some great stories, including this one. So, what do they do with this? Well, in brief, I'm going to try to be as brief with this as possible. While on their honeymoon, Rory and Amy, the Doctor's 2 companions, are on a spaceship which is zooming towards this planet, and the ship is out of control. It's getting lost in these very thick clouds. And the only way the Doctor can save them from crashing, is to go down and convince the guy who controls the clouds, he's got a machine that controls the clouds, to, open it up and let them land. Unfortunately for him, one Kazaran Sardith, as played by Professor Dumbledore, doesn't want to do that because he just doesn't give a shit. And of course it's Christmas on the planet, and the Doctor decides the only way to get this guy to use his cloud machine to allow this ship to land is he has to go back and make this person a nice guy. So we have a couple things going on here. And first of all, you have the Doctor actively knowing that he is doing the story to A Christmas Carol. So that's number 1. Number 2, and this is why this one is so beautiful to me. As mentioned all the way back when I was talking about the Flintstones, I think that for a story about Scrooge, so many versions of it don't really care about Scrooge. They don't want to know what makes him tick or what makes him the man that he is, and what exactly needs to change in him in order for him to be, redeemed at the end. But this version is all about that. The Doctor, using the time travel MacGuffin that he is famous for, goes back in time to visit this guy as a child and try to give him a happier life so that he will be a better person in the future. And it goes up, it goes down, and you watch this guy and his life and his story being rewritten before his eyes. And it is a beautiful storytelling idea. And it is heartbreaking to watch. Big ups to Professor Dumbledore, and I'm calling him Professor Dumbledore because his actual name, I believe it's Michael Gambon, but I keep wanting to say Brendan Gleeson, which is not right. But for some reason that gets stuck in my head. So as opposed to calling him by his real name, I'm calling him Professor Dumbledore. But man, what a performance he gives as Kazaran Sardith. And it's one of the few versions of A Christmas Carol wherein you really feel for the Scrooge character. You really feel for him, for what he's gone through, what the Doctor has put him through. And this is something that takes such a unique look at the material and does something fun with it. If you've never seen it, turn this off now, skip ahead, because I want to talk about what he does with Christmas Future. And if you haven't seen it, you need to see it for yourself. So go do that, then come back, okay? I'll wait. How you guys doing? All right. Okay, you're back. Wasn't that fucking cool? Wasn't that fucking cool? And just shocking that to achieve the Ghost of Christmas Future, he takes young Kazareth into the future to view the man that he's going to become. It's fucking brilliant. And all of this helped along by Matt Smith, who was always my favorite Doctor, who has that wonderful mix of childlike joy and really dark undertones. And that just fits in with this story so well. As with all great Doctor Who stories, this one ends in a very bittersweet manner, and teaches us the lesson that happiness and sadness are not separate entities. They're two sides of the same coin, and you really can't have one without the other, which is exactly what Scrooge should learn from the story of A Christmas Carol. And lastly, a fantastic Christmas song that I've used in a couple productions by opera singer Kathleen Jenkins, who plays the Belle character in this. Gorgeous song, really well done. And my number one version of A Christmas Carol ever is Blackadder's Christmas Carol. Yeah, Blackadder, baby. To understand why this one is my top, and why it is so perfect, you kind of have to understand the concept of the Blackadder television show starring Rowan Atkins, Mr. Bean. So the Blackadder show, if you've never seen it, first of all, go do that. But if you haven't seen it, it is essentially Rowan Atkinson playing the various descendants of a single family line called the Blackadders throughout history. And each season is a different time period. So the second season, he was a suitor to Queen Elizabeth. The third season, he was a butler to Prince George. In the fourth and final season, he was a captain in the trenches during World War I. So it's this story that kind of skips around in history. But the key thing is that the character of Blackadder, Edmund Blackadder, is seen in all of these different incarnations, is a villain. He's a bad guy. He's a dick. He is self-serving. He is ruthless and heartless and will cut anybody down in order to get ahead. Now, I know that is not unique in today's entertainment industry, because you see characters like that all the time. But at the time, it was pretty different. And of course, hysterically funny. Now, you hear all that and you think, well, this is a character that is tailor-made for A Christmas Carol, because you have an evil, heartless character. And in fact, in between, I believe it was in between the third and fourth seasons, or it might have been between the second and third, but in between seasons, they did a Blackadder's Christmas Carol. And right from the opening narration, you knew this was not going to go the way you think it is. The opening narration reads something along the lines of, "In old London town was the mustache shop of Ebenezer Blackadder, the kindest and loveliest man in all of England." So in this version of A Christmas Carol, Scrooge is actually really nice. And in fact, too nice. He allows everyone, family, friends, customers, to take advantage of him. And does it all with a smile on his face and a good thought in his heart. Until Christmas, when he is visited by the spirit of Christmas. So we only have one ghost in this version, played by Robbie Coltrane, basically doing Hagrid before Hagrid, because the costume looks almost exactly like Hagrid. Comes in, and they get into a conversation, and he says, well, you should see the way your ancestors were. And he shows Ebenezer Blackadder Christmas scenes that were shot from the various other seasons of the show, and he gets to see his ancestors being nasty villains and horrible people, but always coming out on top because of it. And because of this, as opposed to learning the usual lesson that Scrooge needs to learn, that, as the Ghost of Christmas puts it, that the rewards for good behavior are largely spiritual in nature, but you're all the better for it, Ebenezer Blackadder learns the complete opposite lesson, that bad guys have all the fun, and resolves to be bad. I've said it all through this review. From a very young age, I suffered from Christmas Carol fatigue. I really did. It was something I could not stand to see one more fucking version of. And then I see this thing. I don't remember how old I was when I saw it. I don't think I was junior high or maybe even elementary school was when I first saw it. And I had no knowledge of the rest of the show. All I knew was that Scrooge was nice, and then he became mean. And because of that very simple concept, that very simple perversion of the classic story, this thing wormed its way into my heart, made a nest, and laid eggs. That is a disgusting analogy, but there it is. And ever since, this has been my absolute favorite version of A Christmas Carol ever. So, that's my list. There are surely other great productions, and I know if anybody's watching this, or the people who are watching this, I know you all have your own personal favorites, and that's fantastic. But if you've never seen one of these, I advise you go ahead and give them a look. You might find a new favorite. So, thank you for joining me on this inaugural sleigh ride for I'll Be Reviewing for Christmas. We'll be back all month with holiday-related specials and shows, and maybe, just maybe, bring a little bit of the holiday spirit to all of our lives. So, from Drive Home Reviews, this is me saying, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies, and God bless us, everyone.